Hi everybody, my name is Sarah and welcome back to Educating Adventures. I'm sure many of us have seen a giant rainstorm at some point during our lives. And have you ever wondered where all that rain comes from? And when the storm is over and all the puddles disappear, where did the water in those puddles go? That's exactly what we're going to be exploring today, so let's get started learning about the water cycle. Most of the time when we picture water, when we picture rain falling from the sky, or when we picture a puddle on the ground, we're thinking of water in its liquid form. But water actually exists in three major phases. It can be a liquid, like we see in the puddle, or the ocean, or rain falling from the sky. It can also exist in a solid form, as ice or snow. And water can even exist in a gas form, in a way we can't even see it. And sometimes when water exists in its gas form, we call it water vapor. So these three major phases that water can be in, liquid, solid, or gas, water exists in all of these phases all around the world. In fact, more than 2/3 of the planet is covered in liquid water by the ocean. We also see water in the ice caps in their solid form, and there's water in the atmosphere all the time, all around us. So regardless of where this water is or what phase it's in, water connects all sorts of different parts of our planet. So I want to give you guys a moment to discuss as a class, can you think of any ways that water moves around? How might water connect one ecosystem to a different ecosystem? I'm going to give you guys a minute to talk. This is a good opportunity to pause the video while you discuss. Alright, are you ready? So right away when I think about how water moves around, some of the very obvious ways that come to mind for me are rivers and ocean currents, which bring huge amounts of liquid water from one ecosystem, sometimes all the way to a brand new ecosystem. So there's many different ways that liquid water can travel around the world, but water can also change between those three phases that we mentioned before and travel from ocean to land up into the atmosphere. And when we talk about the way that water moves within the Earth's atmosphere, that pattern, we call it the water cycle. So we're going to look at a quick example of a water cycle, and we're going to start off with that puddle that we mentioned before. So if we have a puddle after a big rainstorm, the sky clears up and the sun comes out, and when the sun shines down on that puddle and the liquid water warms, it turns into a gas. It turns into water vapor. And when liquid water turns into water vapor, we call that evaporation. And then that water vapor can travel up into the atmosphere. After enough time has passed and water vapor is collecting and collecting in the clouds, it can get heavier, and eventually it turns back into liquid water and falls from the sky. So when it's in the clouds and it's changing from water vapor back into a liquid, we call that process condensation, and that usually happens up in the clouds. And then when the water droplets form and they fall back down to the earth, we call that precipitation. So when we think of rain or snow or hail or all the different ways that water can fall from the sky back towards earth, we call that precipitation. So it can happen in lots of different ways. And eventually that water accumulates back on the ground, maybe in a puddle, and the whole process starts over again. That's why we call it a cycle. Evaporation is the most common way we think about water vapor entering the atmosphere because it happens all over the place in the giant oceans that we mentioned before. But water vapor can also enter the atmosphere through a process called transpiration, which occurs in plants. Plants on their leaves have these tiny little holes, and leaves are usually where plants store their water. So when the sun shines down on the plants, some of the water that's stored in the leaves can actually escape through those little holes. And that's called transpiration, when water vapor moves from a plant right away into gas form into the atmosphere. Water vapor can also enter the atmosphere through a process called sublimation. And that is when we have ice that turns directly into a gas without entering the liquid phase first. So there's a couple different ways that water can enter the atmosphere aside from evaporation. So now when we think about the different ways that water can travel from ecosystem to ecosystem, we can think about things bigger than just a river or just an ocean current. We can think about the clouds and how water vapor is traveling all across the Earth's atmosphere. Now this is really cool, right? This is a really awesome thing that we are constantly surrounded by, but it does have some slight negative consequences. Because water is traveling, whether in liquid form or gas form, that means if one area becomes polluted, that water source can actually take pollutants all around the world. Now this might mean when we have liquid water, if there's fertilizer or chemicals that get into a local lake or pond. This could also mean the water vapor that's becoming polluted by greenhouse gases. All of these pollutants are not just trapped in one area, they travel all around the world in the water cycle. So that's why it's really important that we're protecting our local water sources, we're reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, not only to protect the water cycle for us, but for ecosystems all around the world. So the water cycle, while it is very cool and huge and expansive, it also means that we have to think about not just our local neighbors, but our global neighbors as well. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining us today while we learned all about the water cycle. I hope to see you guys next time at our next educating adventure. Thank you so much.